Okay, we're live. Welcome to the sixth Junior Golf Recruit Podcast, the show that covers everything regarding junior and college golf. I'm Peter Festi, and today we're discussing golf strategy with Scott Fawcett, owner of Decade Golf. As a reminder, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and get notifications of future episodes. Also, check out our past podcast guests this year: Chris Zambri, Will Brewer, Josh Brewer, Michael Beard, and Christian Jones.
That's a good start right there, man. Good
It's a good
work.
way. I got Chris at the beginning and you at the end. This has been a fantastic year. So,
You,
uh,
you know, it's funny, and I know you'll finish your thing right there, but Will
yeah.
Brewer was the head golf pro at the course I grew up at, and I did not realize he was coaching college golf. And he's got a pretty unique voice. And I was doing
Yeah.
a seminar up at the U.S. Junior at Inverness, and he raised his hand and asked a question, and I was like, "Is your name Will Brewer?" And he's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "I was a junior golfer." He didn't remember me at all, but I was like, "I was at Glen Eagles where you were at for however many years." Carry on. Sorry.
Well, I was telling a family member this morning. I feel like Chris is almost like the Kevin Bacon of my podcast this year. That um, Chris obviously worked with you, and then uh, Josh Brewer worked for him. It was an assistant with him at USC, and um, so, anyways, we'll get started. So. Uh, Scott, I met you almost 6 years ago. I looked it up. It was in December 2018. My son and I attended one of your seminars that you hosted at our golf course here at Indian Hills.
Hmm.
Um, and as you remember, Tom Glavine attended that. Very quietly came into the seminar, just went and sat out on the left side of the room, just another golfer in the room. No big deal. Um,
Until I started peppering him with questions. I was like, there's not only so often you get a guy like that in the room, I'm going to ask you a few questions throughout this show.
I know. And I was trying to remember. I think I was trying to remember my name because I remembered some of the faces. There were about 5 to 8 high school sophomore and juniors that attended your seminar here. All of them went on to play Division One golf. I'm not sure if that's a coincidence or not. But I'm going to give that a lot of credit to you. 5 months after attending your seminar, my son went on to win the Georgia 7A state individual title. His team finished second.
Nice.
I'm also a longtime user of yours, and I've read Mark Brody's book a number of times. Um, so with that, Scott, welcome.
I did a podcast last night where the guy held up a copy of Every Shot Counts, and I was like, "Here's my copy." I finally beat the pages and spined so much into oblivion. I just took the ones that have the date on it, laminated right here on my desk. I appreciate you having me on. I always do enjoy these conversations, and I definitely like them when they're focused on junior golfers. It's funny because obviously I get myself in a lot of trouble on social media from time to time arguing with whoever, but I literally do that for the junior golfer. I don't want them wasting year after year after year working on things that aren't entirely accurate because they hear a guy like Brad Faxon say, when I missed a putt, I had to mark my comebacker, and it's like that's just not what you did because there's no other way to interpret that information than ramming putts in. And I know like Zalatoris, obviously the first guy that I worked with, that was one thing that he thought, never up, never in. And so I don't want to feel like I'm a martyr here, but if I am a martyr, it is for the junior golfer for sure.
Yeah, well, and I think what I learned initially was just, and I think what um, the golfing community, whether it's junior golfers, college golfers, professional golfers, I think you told us in your seminar, you're just advancing us. Any golfer that listens and follows this, you're advancing, 5, 10 years of knowledge that you'd have to. I'm not even sure that you would get all that knowledge if you just came by it, you know, naturally.
You may,
So
but you may not even recognize it. I mean, again, there's not the data for strategy and all that stuff. That's unique just because we could not have done that prior to Mark Brody's work. But a lot of the rest of the stuff that I talk about, it's like, man, I've heard this along the way and I've heard that along the way. But once you start using data to support the points, it makes it crystal clear the point. And that's really what allows you to then adhere to. Because if you do decade, if you play golf correctly, it's gonna feel kind of boring, kind of repetitive, kind of script-like. And it's funny because like that's one other main criticism. This just takes the fun out of the game. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like shooting lower scores is the point. You're explicitly saying I like being frustrated and mad because that's the fun of the game. I'm like, not doing dumb stuff repeatedly that makes you feel like you should have shot lower is the fun stuff. Give that a try once and come back to me.
Yeah, no, like 2 weeks ago, I shot even par, which was great, a great score for me. And I didn't come back and tell my wife, oh my gosh, I just had the most horrible day. I shot even par, playing away from the pin. It was awful. I don't know how people enjoy these low scores. It's
I
incredible.
hate tapping in for par a ton. I mean, there's a lot, I'm sure we'll get around to all this stuff, but I played Champions Tour qualifying school first stage 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And my the longest par putt, I mean, I had a couple 6 footers after chips, but if I hit a green in regulation, my longest par putt was 30 inches and I hit 68% of the greens. What's 0.68 times 72? I hit 49 greens and my longest par putt was 30 inches. I mean, literally 70% of the holes I tapped in for par. Like that's so stress free. And again, that's just focusing on the right things that I'm positive we will get to throughout this time.
Does that just take away, like, I mean, you're taking away an accumulation of stress. And I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but if you're having 4 or 5 foot par putts every single hole, or I think you played 4 rounds, didn't you? Uh,
Yeah.
that's just does that stress accumulate? Um,
Yeah. I mean, and this is one thing that I would not have thought of it this. If you'd asked me in 2014, 15, 16, why is Decade, taking off with guys like DeChambeau and Zalatoris and whatever, I'd have been like, oh, it's all the strategy, it's all the math. I'm so smart. Look at me. 10 years into it, I'm like, it's all the mental side of it. Again, I don't want to be a sports psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but it really is the sports side. And I would not have thought of that until Stuart Sink after he won his second time since joining Decade. And he said, it takes the mental energy. He was on PJ Tour the day after he won at Harbor Town back in whatever it was, 2022 or something like that. And he said, it takes the mental energy that used to be required to deliberate and make a decision like that. And the system makes the decision for me, which keeps me fresh. And I was like, I don't think I ever put enough value in that, but it made a few memories pop up. And one of them was with Zalatoris when we won the US Junior in Houston, with me caddying. Houston in July, walking 3 straight 36 hole days is not fun. As a 51-year-old, thank God I was 41 at the time because I could not have done it right now.
yeah,
But we noted on the drive back to the hotel each day, really not that tired, not as tired as you would think. And in hindsight, I think that is a function of all he had to do was walk and swing, and all I had to do was walk and think. I didn't have the swinging fatigue, which again, over the course of hitting balls to warm up and hitting shots and everything, like it's exhausting. And he didn't have to think because I told him everything to do. This is your target. This is your shot. Obviously we decided on the club together because he hits his irons about 9 clubs further than me. But aside from that, we each had our half of the game, and it really did relieve the mental fatigue. And I just again I didn't really put any emphasis on that until Stewart said what he said, and I'm like, you're spot on there, buddy.
yeah. Well, and there everyone has a round where it just gets away from you for whatever reason, whatever reason. And those ones always seem more um, taxing on the brain
Well,
because
they're
you're
just wheels.
because you're in
They're
the
just
trees and it's in places you shouldn't be, and you're trying to figure out how to save shots instead of just, gosh, I'm in the fairway again, or I'm on the
Well,
green again.
even more, you're still going to be in the trees. Like I can't fix bad shots,
Yeah,
but you're also not going to get in there and stress out like, okay, well, how can I get up there around the green? How can I still make par here? And it's like once you realize, hey, I'm in the trees and there's some in the way, like sometimes it's not that difficult of a shot, but a lot of times there's something in the way and like I'm probably making bogey here, just don't make double. Once
yeah,
you realize that's actually the goal, it's not that hard to do typically. And again, it requires incredible discipline, patience, situational awareness. But once you do that, and again, I'll kind of throw the first mathy thing out there. And don't worry, everyone, this isn't going to be a math podcast. But On the PGA Tour, they average making bogey 80% of the time from the tees. Trees, and that's not entirely accurate, but they average zero point 0.8 shots over par once they've hit their tee shot in the trees. And so if you make bogey on tour, you only lost zero point 0.2 shots against your expectation, your average score, if you will. And yes, a bogey loses you a full shot to par, but the main thing we've got to start doing is thinking of fractions of shots gained and lost because rarely does a hole have a 4.0 or whatever scoring average. And
Right.
so once you realize, you know what, this hole was, a 440-yard par four in the first place. So in junior golf, that plays with like 4.5 or whatever. You're making bogey half the time anyways. So just pitch this thing out, get it down the fair, out in the fairway somewhere, get it on the green and two putt it, make your bogey and move on. Just don't make doubles because it's a lot easier to not make double from those situations than it is to make par, and it's more important. And the reason I say it's more important to use the math from the PGA Tour, if you make a bogey from the trees, you lose zero point 0.2 shots versus what you should have expected to. If you make double, you lose 1.2 shots. Most people think of double bogey as just being twice as bad as bogey, but once you start looking at it as fractions of a shot, I lost zero point 0.2 or I lost 1.2. A double is actually 6 times worse than making a bogey, and that's important because not only can we lose shots fractionally, we can only gain them back fractionally. So if I now have a hole that's a 4.2 scoring average and I make a 4 on it, I've gained zero point 0.2 shots back, and most people wouldn't think of a par as gaining you shots back. But if the field average is zero point 0.2 and the whole point of golf is to beat the field average, technically that's what we're actually doing.
Yeah.
You only gain these shots back fractionally, as opposed to most kids, once they've made that bogey or double, they're going to go out and try to make birdie on the next hole because they feel like they've got to get that full shot back, as opposed to thinking, I'm just going to slowly accumulate these fractions of shots back. Once you start looking at it through that lens, it's a lot easier to not, in my opinion, quit. And I hate using the word quit, but I do because it's emotional. It's a lot easier to not quit and start trying to force things back because if your plan wasn't to force things when you started, and then you start trying to force things after a double, that is quitting. You have quit the strategy you intended to play with that day. And again, I use that word specifically because as we were talking about before we got on, your worst 25 or 30% of your rounds are the ones that decades should really impact. And that's kind of a paradox. People think like, oh, I'm going to shoot lower. Like your low end of the range is going to get a little bit better, but not much. It's the high end of your range that really gets better. And at the end of the day, if it's a 36, 54 hole, 72 hole tournament, you're probably going to have one of those rounds in there. And it's about, controlling the damage on that, as opposed to shooting 68 instead of 69. It's about shooting 73 instead of 78. That's really the goal.
Yeah. Well, and I'm gonna plug something for you. So for those that have not been on your website, you can download yardage books for nearly every golf course that you can think of and customize them
It should
by
be every golf course that's in the world. If you come across one that's not in there, it'll be the first one I've seen in 8 years.
and you can customize them. If I remember the last time I did it, you can customize what yardage the tee is going to be at
Yep.
for the tournament that you're going to be playing and so forth. So it's really good. But when my son was in high school, we used your yardage book for one of their regional tournaments, and there was this short downhill par four that, in theory, um, for the professionals or college player, you would probably have them take driver. Um, but for the level of the high school team, the way the green was situated and the lies and everything, it just didn't make sense um, for them to take driver. And so we just put at the top of that hole, no driver. I mean, in red, big X, everything. They could take an iron off the tee and they still had less, probably 80 yards in. It was fine. So they finished the round and we're going hole by hole with some of the players, and we get to the one kid and he's like, I made a double on 10. And I go, how did you make a double on 10? And he goes, I took driver. And I go, what's listed at the top of the sheet? And he says, no driver. And I go, well, why'd you take that? And he goes, because I doubled nine.
I
Like,
did a I did a presentation at a junior golf, like I don't know if it was called the Red River Challenge or whatever it was, but it was top Oklahoma juniors versus top Texas juniors. And I spoke after the first round, and just like mid presentation, they asked about this one hole, this drivable par four, and I played this golf hole in college, in a tournament rather, and I remember hitting driver on this hole, and I was like, I kind of remember the hole you're talking about. Let's take a look at it. And so pulled it up on satellites. Then we went on this 20-minute diversion where I'm showing them exactly how to play it. And I'm like, guys, let's do it. Because they played it like zero point 0.8 shots over par. I'm making up these numbers, but it was drastic. It was huge because there's just nowhere good to hit this tee shot unless you somehow actually got it on the green, which was possible. But aside from that, you were just dead everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was like, can y'all do me a favor? Everybody hit iron off the tee to 80 yards tomorrow, and let's just see what the scoring average does. And it dropped like over half a shot. Again, with some of the best juniors in the game, because again, it was still even like an 80-yard shot. Hitting the green wasn't easy. I mean, this they still played it over par, and it's like,
Yeah.
again, the whole goal is to beat the field average. And if a hole plays over par and you shoot, if you have a par, you literally just gain shots against your competition. And that's the whole goal slash point slash whatever.
Well, and for those for high school kids that are watching this, at least in Georgia, they play six players. They count four scores. At least in
Oh,
state, it's
6 for 4. Interesting.
six for four, and it for state, it's a 36 hole event. And so we keep talking about. Um, we'll talk to the teams after they're done every year, and they're like, "Gosh, we lost by 10 strokes." And you go, "All right, 10 divided by 2 rounds, that's 5 strokes. You're counting four. So can everyone go back on your round and go, there was one shot, one chip, one putt, one stupid decision that you could have avoided, and you're state champions." I mean,
To
the to boil it down to just one shot, one decision, two decisions, three decisions every round. I don't know why
well,
everyone is not following your system.
to that point, if you remember in the Olympics this year, I think it was the men's 100-meter dash. It was like a photo finish where like all three guys, like you couldn't tell them apart. And
Yeah,
when I saw that, I was just like, obviously that's amazing. But and I don't even know what gave me the idea to do this, but I went back to the NCAA championships this year, and there's a 4 round cut to the low eight. And I think if memory serves me correctly, it was like 1,170 shots. And I did the math of one divided by 1,171, which is 0.00008, I believe. And then I did the math of like 0.006 or something divided by 9.7, or whatever the winning the delta of third place to first place
yeah,
was 4 times higher than the delta from the guys, the team, I think it was OU, that missed by one. And it's like you look at that photo finish, missing at regionals is 4 times closer than that.
yeah,
It's like, how can you even get closer than that? Again, one shot over 1,171, 16 rounds of golf. And it's like, we all think, I missed by one because of this. It's like, no, no, you missed by 4 thousandths, 4 10 thousandths, whatever the number is, uh, as a percentage.
yeah.
And it's like every shot. I mean, again, Mark Brody's book is called Every Shot Counts for a reason. It's a great title.
Yeah. Well, in college, it's 54 holes, five count four. And so even if you lost by 12, that's still just one shot per day per counting player. It looks bigger than it is, but it's not really that big of a margin.
Well, and if you do the math on again, like Tiger won, Tiger to me, in my opinion, is by far the greatest player of all time. I'll maybe give Jack was close in there with the mental game. I don't believe so, just because of Tiger's experience with meditation since he was born.
Yeah.
Jack was the goat of thinking in his day, but Tiger's the probably the goat of any sport that's ever played mentally. And if you start thinking again about these shots, if you divide one by 280, it's 0.3%. It's like it doesn't take much better of a mental game. See, I'm not even good at English. Much better of a mental game. That cannot be right. It can't take that much better of a mental game to yield zero point 0.3 shots, 0.3% rather, over 72 holes. And now if you just start doing that, 5, 6 shots a round of better commitment, mindset, everything, he's just unbeatable, which obviously there was a stretch where he was. He's better physically and he's light years better mentally. um, that's the point. I mean, that really is the point of decade at the end of the day now.
So I in preparing for this, I was thinking about well, one of my favorite courses back when I was growing up in LA was Riviera, and I know you put some some posts out about number 10. But to what extent do you, and I'm putting you on the spot for this sort of, but to what extent are you and Mark Brody responsible for the number of junior players and college players succeeding on PGA Tour events, or maybe not succeeding, but doing better um, than they probably should. I mean, Luke Clatton just finished T2 on Sunday. He's had a great run
Ray
this year,
Jones is a
but
huge decade guy, so his college coach is a huge decade guy. I mean, again, I don't know
but
what
Tiger
he's
was the best ever, and he barely scratched anything at the LA Open when he was a junior or even in college. I mean, he just so is your system allowing juniors and college players to play at an elite professional level earlier rather than having to come
I
out on
believe
tour for
so.
a couple of years and figure this out?
Well, if you think about it historically, like players peaked in their early 30s. And I firmly believe, and again, this is all kind of looking back and as Steve Jobs says, connecting the dots. And the male brain is kind of lucky if it finishes developing at 25. It's funny because I've toured the country telling people that for the last 10 years, and now that I've got a 15-year-old daughter, I'm like, oh my God, these decisions are just unbelievable. But what I really believe historically was, you had great players in college and they get out and they get on tour and they kind of screw around for a few years while their brain is finishing developing because the last part to develop is the prefrontal cortex, which is where decision making happens. So the rest of the brain is getting experience, but the brain still doesn't know like how to use that and put it together moving forward. And so I believe that historically players had to get out on tour, wait for their brain to finishing developing, and then use a couple years of experience to finally put it together. And so it was a bit of a survivorship bias. I personally believe I was starting to figure it out. Like 2001 was one of my better years of playing mini tour golf, which I was 27 years old. And I think I was starting to figure it out, but then we had a mini tour that stole our money. We had 9/11, and I missed by one shot at second stage. And I was just exhausted with it. And I was like, I got to do something else. Like, I can't handle this. And I do believe that I was the kind of guy that was probably about to really start doing some good things, again, looking back, because since then I have done some great things. I've made it to final
Mhm.
stage of amateur as to tour school as a 35-year-old amateur. I've just gotten to final stage of champions Q school as a 51-year-old amateur. I do believe, like I say, I was just starting to figure it out. And really, now we can take data. And again, I hate saying data and I hate saying math because so many people are like, oh my God, well, I'm not good at math. It's like the biggest math in decade is 5 + 2 - 1, and anyone can do that. And if you can't, you need to start studying a little bit more. So, I really do believe that just letting kids, well, the reason I called it decade was Zalatoris sent me a text after I caddied for him at the Texas Amateur in 2014 that he won by 4. And he sent me a text that said, I'll never be able to thank you. You've given me 25 years of experience in 5 days. And I really sat there that night and thought about it. I'm like, he's right. I really showed him this is how the game works. And again, really hadn't even accomplished most of the mental side of it yet. It was just pure data. Here's strategy. Here's your target. Here's what we're doing on the putting green. Uh, and I do believe that we've just kind of lifted the veil. Knowledge is cumulative, meaning every generation, if you and I had to sit down and just knit a sweater, it would take us 10 years, first of all, how to figure out how to make a needle, then how to
Right.
make yarn. And I
Yeah.
mean, it would take us 30 years to make a single sweater that we can now make in probably 9 seconds, with the right equipment. And so knowledge is cumulative. Again, I'm standing on the shoulders of guys like Mark Brody and Dave Pelz and
Mhm.
other people who kind of led the way. But
Yeah.
what I do believe I did was when Mark Brody, who I say academic, and most of the time when people say that they're being derogatory, but Mark is an academic for handicap. He did the correct thing with what the PGA Tour asked him to do, find us better stats. And most people, when they think of statistics, they think of how can what do we let's find the areas you need to improve in. as a former playing professional who felt like I should have been better, the obvious use of data to me was figuring out strategy, figuring out decision making. And so it really is just a perfect kind of 1-2 punch of in 2010 was when they first released strokes gained putting, and that was when I first started really actually having some data. But if you rewind the clock even further, in 2003, Chris Como and I met playing in an underground poker room here in Dallas, and we started really talking about poker strategy. And over the next 4 years, I started seeing golf as a poker game, because at the end of the day, it actually is. Any game has a mathematical component in its strategy. And so as I started doing that, I started realizing, man, there's just some old cliches that aren't accurate. Never up, never in. Let's just get this 3 wood in play. And to be perfectly honest, even, hey, this is a hard shot, just aim at the middle of the green. Oftentimes, middle of the green is just as bad as aiming directly at the flag. And so it really is a game that you have to play correctly. So again, circling back to your point of Luke Clanton and these amateurs, what Stuart Sink actually said in Hawaii this year. They asked him after the round, like, what do you think of all these young guns coming out and just doing great? And Stuart said, at this point, you don't even need experience. You can just buy experience. And he said, I'm not saying that in a negative way. I subscribe to all the same stuff these kids do. I'm using all the data in the exact same way. But now you just don't even need experience. You do need to put in, 4 to 10 hours of watching decade tutorial content, and then you're going to go out there and screw it up a ton. But instead of being oblivious to the mistake you made, you're going to realize the mistake you made. And importantly, you're still going to make mistakes. Even I, at 51, that knows this stuff better than anyone on the planet, at Champions Tour qualifying 2 weeks ago, I did some of the dumbest stuff possible. That in hindsight, I'm like, okay, that was silly. You could have, I'm rusty. I don't play much tournament golf. But you're aware of the mistake once you do kind of the post analysis. You're like, I could have chosen this club instead of that. I could have done it. We want to figure out what could we have done better in real time, because just figuring out a fact like, oh, the wind gusted, that was the wrong club. Like, that's not helpful. But I could have made this decision better by thinking of it this way, by figuring out what is it to the back of the green, what is it to the front of the green, and when I'd say those things, it's largely for better club selection. I could have done better on probably 4 or 5 shots over 72 holes. And those 4 or 5 shots were like 4 or 5 over par. Like, and yes, I finished eighth and got through first stage, but going into final stage where there's only 5 cards, there's no room for that kind of waste. And so really thinking through those club selections a little bit better. I hope I do better there than I did at first stage, and then I'll have a chance.
Yeah. And even from my personal experience using it, I did not play golf until after college, and I was a tennis player before that. And it dawned on me when I was trying to teach my son how to play tennis, and I didn't realize how fast the game was relative to golf. And once your opponent hits the ball, how little time you have to figure out where is the ball, where do I need to get to, where's my opponent, where do I want to hit this. But the part that I took away from it was, you're computing all this in less than fractions of a second. But then once I made up my mind, I just swung the tennis racket. I didn't feel like, don't hit it here, don't hit it there, whatever. It's a much more reactionary sport, but I've taken that over to golf and said, all right, I'm doing what Scott said. I've taken this target off the tee. I know what the margin for error is, and I accept that. So just swing. I feel freer swinging at something knowing that it's probably not going to go exactly where I want to go, but I figured out where that margin is, and it makes me, like, even for example, back pins. I think a lot of people take on back pins too much. And there's a lot of times that I will have a club and say, it's 170 the pin, but I've got a 165 or 163 club. I just hit it knowing this is going to be short of the pin, and I'm fine with that. It's going to be on the green. I'm fine with it. If it happens to get back there by mistake, okay. But if
Yeah, the
not,
wind lays down or the wind gusts behind you. If something happens, I
but
would say even
I've
more
got a
so that
25 or 30 foot putt.
yeah,
Fine. you know.
Par is a good score. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I hate saying par is a good score, but par is almost always a good score. And literally, even on par fives, especially in junior golf, par is not the end of the world. I mean, again, we're going to, when people step on a par five and think this is a birdie hole, it's like even if it plays with a 4.7 or 4.8 scoring average, which I doubt very many do in junior golf, I could still stand on the tee and bet everyone $100 that comes up to the tee, you're going to make par. And everyone would take that bet, and I would print money. I mean, literally everybody would take that bet. And that's, again, situational awareness and not thinking when you make par, oh, I just wasted a shot there. Like, probably not. I mean, probably not. Most par fives, unless they're stupid, you're gonna, even if they're reachable, you've got a long iron or 3 wood in. There's probably not. I mean, you might make birdie, but let's don't make double trying something dumb.
Well, when the coaches that I've interviewed on the podcast, and even ones I've just talked to on the phone, I always ask them when you go out to watch a junior at a tournament, you're watching them live. I go, what are you looking for? And there's always a difference. That the junior player always thinks, I see the college coach standing over there. I need to birdie this hole because that's what's going to get me a scholarship. And the coach is sitting there going, I don't really care. I'd love to see a birdie, but I've seen birdies before. I want to see, you get in trouble or you just made a bogey on the last hole. What do you do on this hole? They're looking for the ability to play a hole correctly rather than play it exceptional necessarily because
I
that's
I had an idea for a tweet. I mean, it's been a number of years ago, 6 or more years ago, probably. But I sent a text to J.C. Deacon, Conrad Ray, Walter Chun, Zambri, like some of the greatest college coaches out there. And I said, if you agree, I'm about to tweet something. If you agree with it, will you retweet it? Because I really think it's important. And the tweet was basically when a college coach comes out to watch you, they're kind of hoping you play bad because they want to see how you handle it. They're
yes,
watching you because they know you shoot scores. They're not out there watching you because they're hoping oh, I
right.
want to see this kid shoot 65. They know you can. That's why they're there. They want to see how you handle the adversity. And when I tweeted, every single one of them was like 1,000% retweeted, quote tweet, juniors, this is how it works. And then it wound up going pretty viral because then every college coach wound up seeing it and retweeting it. And it was probably literally my most viral tweet I've ever thrown up. Now, yes, I did ask a couple, but I said if you don't agree with it, don't retweet it. But like if you do, please do because I feel like juniors need to see this. And it's funny looking back because I'm not going to mention my college coach's name, but he wasn't necessarily an all-time great college coach. And he watched me. He just happened to walk up into the Texas Junior in 1989, and this hole was like 330 or something, and I drove the green. And he was like, like there's no chance he knew who I was because I wasn't very good. So he actually walked with me up that hole, and I went up there and three putted it from probably 20 feet because I was trying to make the eagle putt, jammed it like 6 feet by, missed it coming back, and he literally turned around and walked off. And it was funny because he had no idea who I was whatsoever. And I wound up going there after my freshman year. I transferred to it. And I asked him if he remembered that. And he's like, not in the least. I'm like, that was the first time you saw me hit a shot. And he's like, I see that 1,000 times a year. So no, that
Yeah.
does not stick out to me.
All right, let's do um, mostly for the junior players, fact or fiction on a bunch of things. Uphill putts are easier than downhill putts.
I'm going to go with fact, but I'm also going to go with that's irrelevant. Meaning from the fairway, you're not good enough to intentionally hit it 5 yards below the hole. I mean, you can intend on doing it, but we've got to think of your shot pattern as being a shotgun blast because everything about decision making is where do I want to center that shot pattern, not where I want to center that shot. And so if I take the entire shot pattern and I shift it 5 yards short of the hole, and the reason I use that number is when I ask a tour player and they're always like, you have to be below that hole. I'm like, okay, how much? 100% of the time they've said 5 yards is what I'm kind of doing. Um, and I'm like, well, you've just tacked on, I mean, quite literally 15 feet to your average proximity. That's a bad idea. So when you happen to get it above the hole 15, 20 feet, Yeah, it didn't work out. But the only what you're actually trading that for would be a 30 or 40 foot putt from below the hole, and that's a bad idea. So, yes, that's a fact, but no, it's irrelevant. Even on chip shots, if you're trying to chip it below the hole, and this is one where it's really important, you're just tacking on like 4 or 5 feet to the average length of your putt, and every inch from 4 to 8 feet is, excuse me, from 3 to 8 feet is 1% in your make rate. So you're literally just destroying your up and down rate if you're trying to leave a specific putt. We want to chip it as close to the hole as physically possible. We don't want to think about leaving it below the hole for any real reason from the fairway.
Perfect. All right, this one's more old school from when I was first learning how to play golf. So laying up on par fives produces more birdies than going for the green.
Definitely fiction. Um, I want you to be as aggressive as possible um, within the constraints of the shot. So if you are, this is the deal, and this even gets back to if somebody's like, I don't like a 30-yard pitch shot. Well, if you're trying to lay it, or I'd rather lay it up to 90. First of all, you better be really sure you're not good at the 30-yard shot, which 90+% of people they might think they are. So if you hit a bad shot from 30 yards, like, that was gross. It probably was actually a decent shot from 90. That's huge to it's like, oh, I suck at 30 yards. Like, yeah, but your average lead from 30 yards is better than your average lead from 90 yards. But more importantly, on the PGA Tour, a 200-yard par three will have a shot pattern that's roughly 40 or 50 yards deep. But they're all trying to hit it within probably 5 yards of pin high, whether they're trying to maybe put a little long if it's a front pin or a little short if it's a back pin. Their shot pattern is going to be so if you're trying to lay it up to 90 on the tour, and for whatever reason you're actually only laying it up from 200 yards, if you're trying to lay up to 90, you're probably going to have somewhere between 70 and 110. It's not like you get to place it at 90 yards. I mean, and that's really where people are like, oh, well, I don't like 110 more than I like 30. I like 90 more than I like 30. Well, again, you don't get to place it. So that's pretty much fiction.
So even on tour, when you're watching it on TV, and this one, my son and I both crack up when we hear this. When they're laying up, it's they always say they're laying up to their perfect yardage.
Yeah. I mean, it's just insane.
Are they like so if you put them out on the range and you go with their launch monitor or whatever, you go, what's your perfect yardage for a sand wedge? And they go, whatever, 105 or whatever the number is. So the TV person's telling me on the from wherever they are, they're not going to lay it up to 106, not 103. Like,
Tiger on all shots from 100 to 1, excuse me, from 100 to 200, I believe was the number we isolated it down to on par threes, fairway shots, and from the rough. He got, I think it was 42% of his shots plus or minus 5 yards from pin high. So it's a 10-yard window. I mean, this is the GOAT. He got 42% of his shots. Even some of them, again, this is going for the green in regulation. Some of those from only 100. Like if you're 200 yards and you're laying up to 100, it's definitely probably a bad idea. And again, I don't want people to take away from this, well, then I should be going for every par five. Like, no, number 15 at Augusta. I think if
mm,
players have an iron into it, they should go for it. But when you see guys like Hideki back there with a hybrid or whatever he had, and
yeah.
winds up making double or triple, whatever it was in 2022, there's not a whole lot of room distance control wise to land that shot. And so there are times you should be laying up, especially from once you have a head cover on it. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are times to lay up if there's much trouble, but if there's not much trouble, you should be probably getting it up as close to the green as physically possible. And then people will be like, what if the greens are firm and the pin's on front? Okay, so from 100 yards, are you trying to land it 4 yards on the green to a firm green
Yeah.
so it can skip to 20 feet past? Like, people don't think it all the way through from A to Z. Like, even from 100 yards, well, I'm going to be able to put more spin and trajectory on it. Sure. And you're still probably going to have 20 feet coming back. Let's get it up and around the green where we might actually have a chip shot or a small pitch shot where we do have a chance to get it inside of 10 feet. And yeah, most of them probably going to run out to 20 or 30 feet by, but most of them from 100 yards are probably going to run out to 20 or 30 feet by. And your miss hits are going to come up short. And now you're short sighted to what you've already said was a firm, fast green. That's probably a bad idea.
Um, to that extent too, though, for juniors, if you and I went through this with my son, a period where he was starting to hit it longer, and we said, all right, you should be going for par fives. And his short game from maybe 40 yards and in wasn't where it needed to be, but it also showed him that it wasn't there. And he started working on that. And so it I want to make sure that juniors don't really take it as well, I don't have a great a short game as I should be. So um, don't go for it
Again,
at
I
all.
tell juniors all the time, basically, kind of where you're going with this question and what my view is on it. Like, dude, you're a junior golfer. You're somewhere between a +2 and a 4 handicap, probably. You still have a lot of shots to work on and get better at. And we need to hit those shots sometimes, and sometimes they're going to go wrong. But again, that's why you're a 2 handicap or whatever that number is. But
Yeah.
by just trying to avoid them all the time, you're never really going to get out there and work on it and learn how to hit that shot, under at least a little bit of pressure. Again, the math is very clear at basically every level of the game. And again, there are some unicorns out there that do just flat out suck from 40 yards. But one of my thoughts is if you're bad from 40, are you actually good from 80? I mean,
The same
like,
swing flaw is probably causing both. So,
yeah, I mean, again, there's a point in time too where we just need to be working on getting better at golf.
all right, next one,
But
nine
critically on
bucks.
that is when you make the mistake, leave it there. I mean, that's the thing with Zalatoris, where, yeah, he's not great from 3 to 5 feet. But what he doesn't do is take that forward. He misses a 3 foot putt. He taps it in and he goes to the next tee and it's gone. It's dead. It doesn't even matter anymore. That shot is over. It's when you start dwelling on these things, you start the downward spiral of mistakes. And again, there's an old saying, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And this
Yeah.
is where we tend to all just keep digging this hole deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Um, all right, the 9 box drill. For those who don't know the 9 box drill, that's a low, medium, and high fade, straight, and draw.
The nine
Practice.
potential ball flights, yes.
Yeah. Is that that is working on that going to lower your scores?
This is where it's weird. With the driver, certainly not. With the driver, we really want to hit one shape and one shape only. And you can really see everybody on the PGA Tour pretty much adhering to that at this point. You're not going to find, you do find a guy like Rory who does work it both ways, but he's also a unicorn. I mean, Steph Curry shoots logo threes. I can't shoot a logo three. I'm not bad from the top of the key. You move me back 5 feet to the 3 point line, and it turns from a shot to a shot put. And so there are certain things that yeah, I mean, again, Rory's not bad at it, but Zalatoris is really good with the driver. DJ Brooks, I mean, Scotty, you just go right down the list, and the vast majority, and I'm literally talking, I'm making up a number here, but 95% of guys do the same thing over and over and over again with the driver. Now, when we
Yeah.
go to the irons, I'm not as offended with shaping the ball a little bit. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm not as offended because we can start altering ball position. You can't take a driver that you fade and move it back in your stance to change path to the right. There's not enough loft to move it back in our stance.
Yeah.
So changing ball position is really the cheat code to working irons both ways. You're just not going to find a guy that's got a stock shot with a draw, and then he's going to take his iron and move it further back in his, or excuse me, leave the ball position there and hit a fade. Conversely, you're not going to find a guy that hits a fade with his irons, and now when he's trying to draw it, leaves the ball position in the same place. But I am probably playing personally to like a +6 now over the last 4 or 5 months, and I have not hit a single draw yet, not one. And I've honestly probably taken it too far just because I'm kind of proving the point. Because I literally like years past, I'd be like, I mean, I can hit a draw. I just don't ever hit a draw. I've actually gotten now to where I literally cannot hit a draw. I mean, I can do it not intentionally, but if you put me out there in the left trees is a bad spot for me right now because I really struggle to hit a draw. But the reason why that's a problem is the double cross is the biggest problem in golf. When you're trying to hit a draw and you hit a fade, you've now kind of by definition probably hit a block fade because
Mhm.
your path you've intended and shifted it to the right to hit a draw. And if you've hit a fade, you've left the club face open to that. So the ball has started right and moved right. And the flip side of that's true if you're trying to hit a fade. Those are just always off the planet. They're just in a really bad spot. And so the 9 box drill, I mean, I guess with irons, I want you to be able to flight it, hit it higher, lower, and stock. I want you to be able to do that, but I want you to be able to hit the same shape pretty much on 90% of the shots. There'd better be a really good reason why you're going to hit the opposite shot of your stock shot, and trying to get a better look at birdie is not a good enough reason. There's got to, I mean, to be perfectly honest, there's got to be a tree in the way. That's about the only reason to shift it. Because even if the wind is blowing 20 or something crazy on any given day, and I hit a fade and the pin's on the left, unless there's a tree not allowing me to start it where I need to for whatever reason, I'm going to start it further left and hit my cut because, by definition, this is a hard day. Scoring average is going to be high. Just hitting the green from anywhere is probably going to be a positive strokes gain shot, i.e., a good shot. So, with irons, I want you to be able to, again, I've taken it to an extreme. I want you to be able to probably do it, but I don't want you to practice it much because we want predictability of curve over everything.
Shot pattern. Predictable shot pattern is what you're going after more than anything else.
Small shot pattern technically because the double crosses are what makes it huge. I mean, if the ball moves the direction you intended to, it's kind of hard to hit that bad of a shot. I mean, again, I'm talking once we're at the elite level, the scratch type player or better. As long as the ball shapes the direction you intended to, it's probably going to at least be a functional golf shot. It's probably not in the water.
And for most people, I don't know that, let's say that you hit a fade on everything. You'd almost have, and it's kind of contrary to think, I can hit a fade to this shot pattern, but if I hit a draw, I can hit to a better shot pattern. And
Well,
that
Lou
probably doesn't
Stagner,
work.
yeah, I mean, Lou Stagner, who used to work for me, he did a good study with, he had players who had a launch monitor from ranging from whatever handicap, like it was a big sample size, and had them hit stock shot, hard shot, soft shot. And everyone's distance control got worse as they were trying to. Actually, it didn't get worse when they were trying to hit it hard. Most players struggled hitting it soft. And then he had to hit both shapes. And the shot pattern became, again, much bigger for the opposite field shots, but their distance control also got worse. And so what I do, like my concession to this concept is maybe aesthetically, let's pretend you actually do perfectly hit that draw every time. So maybe aesthetically, it looks cooler turning in from right to left to a back left pin. But if your distance control doesn't stay the same, you might actually still hit the ball further away from the hole on average because your distance control is worse. And again, at the end of the day, the whole point of instruction and golf is to make your shot pattern as small as possible. And if we're intentionally doing something that for sure makes it bigger, that's probably a bad idea.
And then the last one I was thinking about when we were talking about this was, and I hear a lot of junior players, high school players, they'll talk about um, how many greens they hit in a round, which is good. But then I always ask them, if I gave you 18 greens where you missed the green by 5 inches, pin high, would you rather take that than whatever your normal shot pattern was? And they're like, well, yeah, I would rather take that. And I go, well, then it's not always the same to say, hitting 18 greens is going to produce a lower score.
That's true, but greens in regulation is pretty much the most correlated thing to your scoring average. And so hitting as many greens as possible is great, but hitting 18 greens in regulation is actually most likely suboptimal because it kind of implies you're not being as aggressive as you should with your shots from inside, let's just say 120 with your wedges. And so we do actually want to miss some greens
Yeah.
because there is certain situations where we are, I mean, again, I always say stop trying to make birdies. Well, at the end of the day, we need to make some birdies. So we want to be getting aggressive when the details of the shot allow it. So it's a shorter shot. The surrounding hazard closest to the pin isn't quite as penal. It's not a lake. It's not a deep bunker. These are kind of the traditional green light situations. But if you're just trying to hit the green in regulation, that's probably you're probably leaving some shots out on the course. But also, the biggest factor in that is how big are the greens? Because if the greens are the size of Pebble Beach, hitting at the dead center of pretty much every green at Pebble is a good idea. But now,
Yep.
if you're playing as an extreme example, St. Andrews, hitting every green is A, not that difficult, and B, not optimal.
It's going to leave too long of a putt,
Yeah, I mean, you're
average.
never gonna make birdie, and you're having too long of putts on average, and it's just a bad idea.
Okay, next question then. So this on tour now, especially when you're watching TV, a lot of times they'll have when they're putting, they'll have kind of they'll animate the putt. It's it breaks 27 inches, and what have you. And so they have a lot of data on the greens. Will there ever be a time when the stats for strokes gained has another dimension of the difficulty of the putt?
No, because that's less relevant than you would think, and it's honestly it's surprising. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go if I can pull this up real quick. Um, is it this one? No. Hold on a second here. I'm trying to. Oh, here we go. 5 feet versus 7 feet. So a 5 foot putt across a 3% slope. So we're talking a big breaking putt. Its make rate is 68.9% on the PGA Tour. A 7 foot putt uphill with zero to so less than 1% slope. So a right lip 7 footer is 56.2%. It's only 2 feet longer and the make rate is 12% lower. And again, this gets back to the idea of every inch from 3 to 8 feet is roughly 1% in your make rate. Well, here's an extreme example of two of the hardest putt versus the easiest putt. And yes, it drops to 12, it's 12% instead of 24%. It's just we want to be getting there's just not a material there is a material difference in the difficulty of putts, but it's also largely irrelevant.
Okay.
Yeah, it's largely irrelevant.
Um, is there a minimum age or handicap that you recommend to use yours? So for junior golfers, should a 9-year-old with a 15-20 handicap be starting to use this, or where would they start?
I mean, truthfully, that's probably a little too inexperienced, but they're on a trajectory where that kid might be dropping 10 shots over the next year to two, I assume. I mean, if not even potentially more, because they just are so good at skill acquisition. And the analogy that I use for this is after I had COVID, I started having a lot of blood pressure issues and whatever. And so I was a 20 handicap cardiologist at the start of COVID. And then over the next 18 months, I probably had 20-ish different doctor's appointments trying to tweak meds. I listened to God knows how many Peter Attia and Huberman podcasts on blood pressure and heart stuff. Now, I'm probably a +2 cardiologist. I'm very confident I could prescribe you the correct blood pressure meds. Would you want to give me a scalpel to go do heart surgery? Well, that'd be a bad idea. What we're trying to do with the junior golfer is get a tour player's brain inside of them. So what I did with all those appointments, I got a cardiologist brain inside of me, but not the physical skill set. I'm trying to get a tour player's brain inside of a junior golfer as quick as physically possible, and then they're going to develop that skill set. They're going to go to medical school and learn how to do surgery. And so again, Zalatoris literally dropped several shots. He was already, had signed to Wake Forest, had already played in the U.S. Junior 4 times at the point that we really started working together. I mean, he was a junior golfer at my home course when I had Corn Ferry status when he was like 9 or 10. And so we played a lot of golf together over, 5, 6 years. But even I didn't exactly know what I was doing. I was playing better golf because I now had the poker background, but I still didn't know how to teach him other than using the traditional ways of saying it. Once I created Decade, I've now got the verbiage to say, oh, here's what I'm actually doing, man. This is what you need to do. So yes, I do believe that any junior golfer, I mean, again, that's shooting, 90 or better. Again, let's just be realistic.
Yep.
And again, being able to understand the mental stuff more than the strategic stuff is really what they need to be doing. And then tracking, either in the Decade app or on their own, the Tiger Five mistakes, which is bogeys on par five. And for them, that player might be double bogeys on par fives. We're trying to find the silly mistakes that you're really going to start dropping shots from. So, but beyond that, like literally, as you start getting into the lower double digits, junior golfers are just ready for it. And this is, again, kind of a joke, but not. If you're the kind of person that thinks buying an app that's based on golf strategy and statistics, if that sounds like a good idea to you, you're going to love it. I mean, and if it doesn't, it might be a bit of a grind, but also I would say you don't want to be as good at golf as you think you do. This
Yeah.
is this is the nuance of not wasting shots. Everyone says they want to be great at something until they see the work required to actually be great at something. And
Yeah.
so I would say you really need to be a little reflective here and say, well, how bad do you want it? Do I really want to be a college golfer? Because if you do, this is your everyone else is learning this and shooting lower scores. You'd better learn it too.
Yeah. That's what I've told some kids is, they they get stubborn. They're teenagers. I want to do it my way. And I go, yeah, but the top of the leaderboard is, look at what they're doing. Look at their warm up. Look at their practice rounds. Look at they're using a yardage book. Look at the things that they're doing. And if you want to be stubborn and say, I don't need a yardage book. I don't need to do practice rounds. I don't need to practice my speed putting. I don't need to do all this. Okay. But, don't be shocked when you're not
Yeah.
playing all the tournaments.
I'll just be a Gen Xer looking at the younger kids being like, well, you're just being lazy. I mean, again, you can't tell me you want to be good and say, I'm going to do it my own way. Like, again, the idea that knowledge is cumulative, come
Yeah.
stand on my shoulders and don't waste the decade of trying to figure this stuff out on your own if you ever even figured it out. I mean, again, I wasn't a great junior golfer, but I did get a college scholarship and I did go to Texas A&M and M and play golf and win, college events. I did win mini tour events and I did get to final stage of PGA Tour qualifying. Like, do you think you'd be a better player if I caddied for you? I know Zalatoris was.
Yeah.
Use the tools available to you to not waste. I mean, again, my canned joke is just, do you feel like you should have shot lower every time you play? And if so, because 100% of us do, if you do feel that way, what's your plan? What's your exact plan to stop feeling that way? If you're like, I'm going to do it my own way, cool. I salute you. How? When I was, again, literally playing professional golf, winning on the, 72 hole event, Hooters Tour events, we used to just go to Chili's and Outback every night and just laugh and talk about the dumb stuff we did. I never once crossed my mind, how can I go about stopping doing that? I just thought that I needed to get mechanically and physically a better skill set. Tiger, higher golf IQ than me, was like, what is it that really, I shouldn't have made that bogey with a foreign. Like that's not, you're not being realistic. And again, he came up with those five things: bogeys on par fives, double bogeys, three putts, blown easy saves, and bogey with 9 iron or less. And junior golfers should turn that into bogey from inside 130-ish, probably. As you get better, turn that into bogey from inside 150. I don't like blown easy save because that's subjective and everybody thinks every save is easy and gets pissed off. So I think that
Yeah.
for junior golfers, turning that into two chips per round, because what we're trying to find, like, if you feel like you should have shot lower every time you play and it's not one of those five things, you're kidding yourself. I mean, you're just flat out kidding yourself. And
Yeah.
again, even I, a guy that kind of understands this more than anyone in the world, even I had, I think it was eight of those Tiger Five mistakes at first stage of, again, Champions Tour qualifying. Like you're still going to have them, but critical to that is don't freak out when you do make that bogey on a par five. When you do, again, I had a three putt from 40 feet in the fringe. Is a pretty, it was, am I 100% from there? But no, I should be 80+% from there. So that's kind of a blown easy save. The bogey on the par five was a mental error. I had a bogey and a double bogey from inside 150 on this one hole that just had my number. And so looking back at those, was there anything I could have done differently? On the three putt, no, I just hit the first putt too hard, had a difficult 6 footer coming back down the hill. Nothing I could have done differently. On the bogey on the par five, I was talking to Omar Uresti, kind of messing around with him. There's 70 yards out there to work with. And I'm like, I'm not ready to hit this shot as I'm over it, but I'm like, dude, there's 70 yards. Just hit it. Don't back off. Just hit it. And I blocked it right, and it landed on the cart path that was within those 70 yards and went into the junk for a lost ball. I could have done something better there. The two bad club selections I was referring to earlier, one of them wasn't even remotely close to the right club selection. I came up short in this bunker where I actually had to go like 20 yards to carry out of the bunker. And then I had like 15 feet of green to work with. This was going to be a hard bump, but it was like in a narrow little shelf on the back left. Um, this is going to be a really easy shot for me to miss the green completely, long or short. And I did it. It almost carried, but then it came back down into the bunker. I wound up making double. And then the other one was, again, I just didn't walk all the way through the potential outcomes of these club selections. And I tried to rip a pitching wedge instead of just kind of feathering a nine because the pitching wedge was perfect if I caught it and hit it solid. But the nine iron had another 7 yards of green past the pin. If I hit it a flighty nine, it's not really ever going long, but it's probably not coming up short either. But what happened was the wind, I ripped it and caught it perfect, and the wind kind of shifted from down to across. I needed help with the shot I was trying to hit. And if I didn't get the help, it wasn't going to work. That's a problem. If you need a little bit of, I don't want to say luck, but if you need something to be consistent with that's outside of your control, i.e., wind, that's probably not the right club.
Yeah. So I think I don't remember which E it is. I don't know if it's a second E or third or the last E in your in decade. Which one is expectations? The second
Second
one.
E, the first E, the second
So
letter.
expectations versus emotions. And like the example I had before, like, I just tripled the last hole. Let's take driver and blast it, in a place that I shouldn't even be. But I feel better for blasting a driver. Why is that such a bad idea?
You
Or
should have
whatever
you should
shot it
have a
is.
plan beforehand and you stick to that plan. I mean, again, like that's just crucial to being successful in golf. So I'm trying to think of a concrete example, but I can assure you somewhere along the way, I made a bogey or something dumb, one of those Tiger Five mistakes, but I stuck to the plan on the next shot. I didn't get up on the next hole and try to squeeze a mini driver going for a par five and two or whatever the case may be that I would not have done. If you asked me on the first tee, if you're on number 15, which is again now I am actually just walking through a scenario where I could have flown a mini driver there, but there weren't a whole lot of good outcomes aside from hitting the green. Like everything else was probably bad. That is a spot where I did lay it up with a 4 iron. So I mean, sometimes you do lay up, and I laid it up to about 50 yards, because there just weren't going to be a lot of good outcomes. If you'd asked me on the first tee in this exact scenario, will you hit mini driver? I'd have been like, let me think it through. No, I would not hit mini driver here. If I get into a spot down there where I'm frustrated because I'm only one under or three over or whatever it is, and I feel like I should have been lower, which again, you're always going to have that feeling on 15. You're always going to have that feeling on 15 unless you're careering. Um, you have quit. Again, I use that word intentionally. You have quit if you don't stick to what you would have done on the first tee. And that goes all the way from club selection to any scenario you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Well, and there was a example I was going to tell you. There was when my son played in the Southern Junior in 2019. They played at Idle Hour in Lexington, Kentucky, and this was the hardest course setup he'd ever seen. 4.5 inch bluegrass. The pins were tucked in the corners of every green. The greens were running, I don't know, 13, 14, something ridiculous. They did not want a junior to break the course record, and it did, and they succeeded. And so I think everyone in the field just kind of came in thinking, I'll just play my normal game at a souped up US Open for a junior, was basically what it is. And so, this field had tons of college players in it. Even par went into a playoff after 54 holes. So, I mean, this was not an easy golf course. And so I think there was 12 players that played in that tournament, and then 3 days later was the Georgia Junior. And at Idle Hour, they were 227 over par for 12 players. And 4 days, 3 days later at Augusta Country Club, they were three over par as a group, um,
Yeah.
where it was probably 2.5 inch rough, bigger greens, little friendlier pins, whatever. But the expectation was different.
Most of my answers to questions are always the utopian answer, meaning a perfect world, this is how you should be viewing things. I do believe a perfect world, and I do believe this, of anything score, position in a tournament related, that's all irrelevant information. It can only make you emotional and start making bad decisions. And again, as a concrete example, in the second round of Q School last week, I had 17 pars and a birdie. It was raining. It was kind of cool. It was a miserable day. And I thought for sure I was in sixth place through the first round. There was no doubt in my mind I was moving up. I mean, zero doubt. This day sucked and I went down three spots. Now, if I had been standing out there the whole day knowing like one under solid, but it's not great today. And again, in hindsight, the pins were a little bit easier, but I wasn't thinking about what are my opponents doing. I was just like, man, I'm playing pretty good here. And I finished the round. And when I went in and looked at the score, I'm like, wow, that's really surprising to me. Then we go out in the third round and it was a little bit calmer. It was not raining. The greens are perfect and I was farting along and I shot even par. Uh, and I for sure thought I probably just got, if yesterday's the scores were X and I just shot one shot higher today, I probably got lapped today. And I go in and I moved up four spots because the pins were harder. So if I had been thinking about on either day where I stand relative to my competition, I would have started making emotional decisions. And again, this is when I say utopian, and for junior golfers, that just means the perfect way of viewing this. It's really difficult to do this. But at the end of the day, there's nothing strategically. If you told me, you need to birdie the last two holes to win a 54 hole event, what I would tell you is, well, guess what? You're probably not going to win. But don't turn a solid third into a ninth because you're trying to win a golf tournament. Third place in junior golf pays good points.
Yep.
You don't want to turn a third into a ninth because a ninth is like college coach, like, he shot 74 in the final round, whatever. Well, it's because you could have shot 71 and finished third, but you tried to birdie the last two holes and finished bogey bogey. Like it just this where you stand relative to the cut and in the tournament is truly irrelevant information. There's this idea in poker of pot equity, which means if you and I have, I'm not even trying to make an analogy of that. Uh, Basically, let's say that you start a tournament and you've got a 10% chance of winning the tournament. Or as an extreme example, Tiger was at like 25%. There's nothing Tiger can do on any given week to make that 30%. But he can start making emotional and bad decisions and turn that into 20. So now you've given him 5% of your odds away for no reason. Same thing for a junior golfer. If you have a 25, let's say you've got a 60% chance of making the cut. You can't make that 70 on any given week because it's the US junior and I really want to make match play. You can only make emotional, aggressive decisions that give away some of that 60% and turn you into a 40% player. And again, this is a really difficult thing to do, but it is correct. I mean, it 100% is the mental side of the game that I'm telling you from caddying. I mean, I caddied about 100 rounds for Zalatoris over a 4 year period until he turned professional. Every summer, I went and caddied the Pat Coast Am or the US Am or whatever for him. So it was about 100 rounds. And we never, I say that there was one time we took into consideration where our opponent was in a match play event or where we stood in a stroke play event. One time it was in the quarters, I believe, of the US Junior. It was on the ninth hole. It looked like our opponent had hit it to like 6 feet. And so the pin was on the dead front right. And I was like, okay, Will, we probably need to get a good look here. Let's get a little bit more aggressive. Again, I'm still in the formative stage of all of this. And he hit kind of this little flary cut 9 iron that landed just short and bounced back in the bunker. If we had stayed with the proper decade target, he actually would have stuffed the golf shot that he hit. And instead, he's down there in the bunker. And then we get up on the green because it was a little bit elevated. That 6 foot birdie putt we thought our opponent had was actually 15 feet. And
Yeah.
now Will's in a spot where he's got a terribly difficult bunker shot. He hits it to like 17 feet, and now our opponent just has to two putt it. And a 15-foot putt on the PGA Tour, 15 feet on tour is only 23%. This junior golfer in that scenario is probably like, he's certainly less than 1 in 5. He's probably like 1 in 6 of making that putt.
Yeah.
Like, just what your opponent is doing is totally irrelevant because, again, if you go to that idea that every inch on tour from 3 to 8 feet is 1% in your make rate, until your opponent gets it within like 5 feet of the hole, you don't really have a very good idea of what he's going to make on the hole. I mean, you just don't. And being
Yeah.
able to tell a shot is within 3 feet from the fairway is pretty difficult to do. Just play your golf and just stop being, emotionally tied to your outcome. And again, that's the hardest thing to do in golf, but it is probably one of the most important things to do in golf.
Um, so we talked about your app has yardage books, but I don't see as when you look at it, when I go to a college tournament, every college player has a yardage book. Every professional has a yardage book. And I go to a junior tournament and maybe 5% at best have one.
Hmm.
And I'm not even, not even the um, to use it for whether it's green reading or whatever, but why should a junior player have one, and especially for target picking off of tees and different things?
Well, again, it's something that the younger you can start it, the better you're going to be at using that yardage book. And like you say, yardage books are free in the Decade app. They're very solid. Typically, let's even say you do buy a yardage book. They're completely different formats from course to course. So you've got to spend all this time. What are these numbers telling me on this book? As opposed to the Decade book, you're going to show up with the exact same format every single time. You're going to know exactly what you need to do. What I'll personally say is, and again, junior golfers, they're usually 40, $50 each. And so juniors that are playing in 20, 25 tournaments a year, like it becomes a real cost. We spend a lot of money building these things to where the data is stripped out of the satellite and you get to make them for free within the Decade app. And I do say, like, hey, if you can afford $1,000 or $2 on yardage books, buy the Straka ones. They're work of art. I
Yeah.
only play in a couple of golf tournaments a year. So yeah, I go ahead and spend the money, but also I do it because I suck at green reading. So I buy the green reading versions. How do I miss it twice? That's so I buy the green reading versions. But if
Yeah.
it weren't for the green reading, I would just use the Decade yardage book. And again, but also I play in like 3 events I care about a year. So yeah, I spend $180 on those things. Again, I think that's overkill and I'm not trying to make Straka money, but if hey, an extra $1,000 or $2 a year on yardage book seems like, well, that's an expense I would rather not use. The books inside of Decade are perfect. And again, to your point, you won't find a college golfer or professional golfer not using one. It's just information that you do need. And so using those things and learning how to use them as low as possible is just an advantage. I mean, it's
It
just
almost
straight
seems
up an
like
advantage.
it's like a mental exercise with in fighting with teenagers. If you said, I don't see a single PGA Tour player or college player that doesn't use a putter on the green, and they go, yeah, but I'm going to putt with my hybrid. You
Probably a
know,
bad idea.
and you're like, 100% of them are doing this, and you want to go a different route. But
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't see it, but you can see that I do have certain things marked in the book because, again, what I teach you in Decade is how to analyze the surrounding hazards. Um, and so that's what I want you to do using your Decade yardage books. I've got little boxes all around the
Mhm.
hole, the green, and that's a reminder to you of you need to be rating how hard like typically historically before Decade, tour players would just put red X's like, oh, don't hit it here, or this is the place to miss it. That's not really relevant information because again, our shot pattern is going to kind of encompass all of those. What we want to be doing, the real question in course management isn't where's the place to miss it. It's how much do I not want to be short-sighted? And that sounds like a subtle little tweak, but it's really, I mean, again, it's a world of difference. Um, that's going to be my Instagram post today. I mean, because that's if there's any one thing I do believe I've brought to golf, And this is where it's difficult because you'll hear Tiger say all the time, and when I'm out there, my practice rounds, I'm figuring out where's the place to miss it and whatever. And I literally used to think this, and the vast majority of people I've talked to about this thought that Tiger, like mid swing, be like, uh-oh, something's wrong. So I'm just going to miss it in the right place. It's like, well, if you could do that, just fix your swing and hit it in the right place.
Yeah.
We've got this shot pattern, and the only thing you can do with shot thoughts like that is make it bigger. It's not like you've got this magical hourglass shot pattern that either hits it by the hole or hits it in the place to miss it. You've got a shotgun, just, and that's what we're navigating around the course, using your yardage book to make these decisions and analyze how much do I not want to be short-sighted in any given spot. That's the way to go about it.
For example, as I've used your books, not all bunkers are created equal. One bunker might have a 1 foot lip, fairly easy to get up and down. One bunker might have a 9 foot lip and not the place that you want to be. And
And
you
one
put that
bunker
in a
might
little
be going
box.
into a downhill spot on the green versus an uphill or side hill spot. Like all bunkers are 1,000% not created equal. You could have you know, 9 foot's obviously pretty deep, but you could have a 4 foot deep bunker that's an easier bunker shot than a 1 foot deep bunker because of the way the green is rolling
Contour.
to or from that bunker. So
Yeah.
you really need to know what you're looking for when you're doing these things. And again, that's what I try to teach, within a decade.
Well, I want kids to understand this the subtleties in the choices that they make in strategy. So um, I looked at the rankings, junior rankings. So from number 1 to 400, and the gap between 400 and 200 is about one shot around. 200 to 100, about one shot around. 100 to 50, about one shot around. It gets a little bit bigger between 50 and 100, or 50 and one. Just, sometimes the number one player is just playing out of their mind. But, you know, to
I am
move
impressed it gets
from,
bigger though. I mean, I am actually impressed that it gets bigger.
yeah. Um, so it's, for those kids if you're ranked around 400 in your class and you want to get into one of the top schools, you're not trying to elevate your game from where you are to Tiger level. It's one shot per round, two shots per round, and these little decisions add up to differences.
And most importantly, rather than considering like this again, a utopian idea, but rather than considering yourself against your opponents, the definition of improving is yourself against yourself.
Yeah.
And so really recognizing like, well, I'm just trying to personally get better, and the results will be what they are. Um, Maverick McNeely's the guy that I worked with when he was first turning professional and everything, and he was asking me, like, where can I work on? I'm like, honestly, your scoring average is like 3.5 from the left rough, I think it was, or the right rough. And on the other side of the rough, it was like 3.2. Again, strokes to hole out from there, not including the tee shot. And I'm like, I don't have any actionable advice for you aside from when you're in the right rough, you need to recognize because I guess he likes to draw it. I'm just making, that's what it would be if it was right or vice versa. I think he liked drawing it at the time, so it was probably the right rough that was higher. You need to just recognize like this is a bad spot for me. How can I average 3.25 from right here? Because that's picking up 0.25 shots against myself. And so really, again, becoming oblivious to what your opponents are doing is just 1,000% the right way to go about it because you're just, it's that idea of 1% better every day. Like, let's just keep getting 1% better because that piles on like you can't even imagine.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to go in a reverse order because I know this is one that you've talked about a lot. So how do kids improve their practice and so forth? I'm going to start with putting and speed. Talk about that one.
The vast majority of your practicing in putting should be on speed control. The best players on tour have by far the best speed control. Yes, you obviously need to work on your stroke because you're a junior golfer. By definition, it's not a PGA Tour caliber stroke, but I guarantee you your speed control is 4 to 6 times worse than your line control. And how you can go prove that to yourself is go put a ball mark on the ground, have your mom or a buddy you know, put a ball mark on the ground and put an alignment rod off to the side of it. From 20 feet, just try to lag it onto that ball mark and just take them and have them move the ball using the alignment rod as the ball mark. Because what we're trying to do is create your shot pattern. So if you miss it 6 inches right and 6 inches short, come over here 6 inches right and 6 inches short and create that shot pattern. What I'm telling you is it will be 4 to 6 times deeper than it is wide. And the reason that's important is once you have a breaking putt, if you hit the putt too soft, it starts breaking sooner. If you hit it too hard, it starts breaking later. So even given the identical read and start line, your shot pattern is still going to get wider because of your speed control. And that just means you're going to have a longer second putt, and you're going to make fewer because you're spreading your putts out instead of keeping them as tight as possible. The hole's just going to get in the way of fewer of those putts. So I do believe that maybe let's call it 25% of your time should be on line control. Probably 50% of your time should be on speed control, and probably 25% of it. We've got a combine in the Decade app that Chris Zambri came up
Mhm.
with while he was at USC called
Yeah.
simulated putting, which is like you have two or three, literally 2 foot putts, and you have some 54-foot putts and 42-foot putts. They're basically the average length of the starting putts that you're going to see in a round of golf. And if you score a 29, you're dead on zero strokes gained putting for the PGA Tour. And so running that like 25% of your time, I've had a number of tour players and Champions Tour players tell me if I could go back in time, that's the only thing I would do to practice my putting. And I think that's aggressive, but also it's going to force you to work on your read, your pre-shot routine. Like you really got to try like you're on the golf course. And so but it just this is where like even I like I practice way more than I should and I play way less than I should. It's hard to not feel like, well, gosh, I get to hit 150 balls in an hour as opposed to playing 4 holes. It's hard to
Mhm.
not think that, not 150 balls an hour, but you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's hard to not feel like that's more valuable. But getting out there on the course and really hitting shots and trying to do different stuff, and that's what the simulated putting in the Decade apps meant for. So, but really working on your speed control. Because again, if you think about your last bad putting round, did you go to the green and work on your speed drill, or did you go work on your line from 6 feet? Like it probably was not your line that was the problem. It was probably your speed control.
Yeah, there was a funny story. I was in Vegas a year ago for the coaches convention, and I was talking to Chris. I met up with Chris for a little bit, and he was telling me about a kid at Pepperdine that was he had a putting coach, and he told Chris, "Hey, I've got a lesson with him tomorrow or whatever." And Chris goes, "Why?" And he goes, "I'm not making enough putts." And Chris, he had really gotten fine tuned with this kid, and like he was starting at like a millimeter offline. He was hitting it in the center of the face, like he was doing everything perfect, and he didn't think he was making enough putts. And he was like, so Chris was like, so you're going to go blow up your putting stroke to try and find something else to that's better than this, when really it was just, I think even speed was correct, so he just wasn't picking good lines when he was out on the course.
Yep.
But he wanted to blow up his stroke to um,
It's insane. I
improve
mean,
that.
it's really interesting how much people, and again, at the tour level, college level, people are finally understanding that speed control is king. The best putters historically have by far the best speed control.
Even if you miss your read by 2 feet, you still have a 2 foot putt left.
Well, again, back to Q school last week, I had, in 49 greens in regulation, my longest second putt was 30 inches, and I made 3 20-footers and a 30-footer, made a couple 12-footers. Like it's hard for people to realize, like if you make the hole as big as possible by not jamming it in, you're gonna make, even by leaving putts short, you're gonna make putts. Like again, the putt that came up short didn't have a chance to go in, but the putt you hit 4 feet by didn't have a chance to go in either. This is again, never up, never in is one of the, sure, inside 10 feet, we shouldn't leave too many short. But even from 16 to 20 feet, Brad Faxon, one of the best putters to ever walk the planet, left 1 in 6 short. I mean, that's just a fact. He left 1 out of 6 short from a mere 16 to 20 feet.
Or in your app, you have a lot of content around what to practice for different areas, correct?
Sure.
Yeah. So for those that don't know what to do, um,
I believe that on the range, you should have an alignment rod down and you should be hitting basically at the exact same target every single time, all the way through the bag. Because you want to be recognizing, am I hitting it right of my target or left of my target 70% of the time? But important to that is, and this is where it gets into this block versus random practice debate. What I will say is randomizing your practice, meaning changing your targets and club very often probably keeps you more mentally engaged. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt of that. But that doesn't mean if you're block practicing, you can't stay mentally engaged. But there is one thing that you can't accomplish with randomizing your practice that you can with block practice. And that's just recognizing, am I skewing my shot pattern left or right? So what I really, my dad used to tell me when I was a junior golfer, you hit balls way too fast. And I thought, well, yeah, I'm trying to get better. So the more I hit, the better I am. And again, that's just not the way it is. What my dad didn't tell me was the importance of being able to walk into the shot. Like when people say I can't get my range game to the course, quite often, you know, it's because they're just statically standing there, pulling a ball over and hitting it, statically standing there. There's a dance to golf, and we're coming in from behind the ball, and we've got our weight shift. I mean, I still to this day can see Zalatoris. He's got the way that he waggles. I mean, like I could snap the second he's about to start his swing because it's this weight shift. This is what your trigger is. People used to think that your trigger is like my last move. No, the whole thing is you getting situated. If you actually go to my YouTube channel, I think it's just if you search Scott Fawcett or Decade Golf, you'll see a round of golf that I just played with Garrett Clark from Good Good, where I shot 65. You'll see me hit, 65 straight fades, less however many putts it is. But you'll see the way that I trigger my swing. It's the same way every single time. And to be perfectly honest, this is it's like the question of do you breathe in or out when you putt? I've actually gotten a little bit in my own head because the driver, I'm like, damn, that's consistent. Like the way that it's tap, tap, hover, go. And I've literally gotten to this point where like I'm actually thinking about it now. Like it's really funny to have to admit this, but it's literally like a do you breathe in or out when you putt? I'm now actually consciously seeing my pre-shot routine, and it's like that should just be on autopilot. Like it's really funny how it's a little bit in my head right now, but it only gets that way through thousands and thousands of repetitions. And so we do need to slow down on the range and hit balls trying to ingrain that trigger, that start of your swing, as opposed to just standing there and just hitting ball after ball after ball. And and again, so just to finish that idea up, what can you do? I do believe that because the driver is so important, you should get behind every single driver you hit in practice because we need consistent ball position. We need a consistent thought process. But with irons, nobody's actually going to do that. Like, so I've just said, driver, you need to. When I hit an iron, so I on the range, I hit this. I don't get all the way behind it, but I do take this last step out. So then I'm coming back in each shot. So I'll hit a shot, pull a ball over, and I'll just take this last step towards the same thing as if I was walking in and doing it. I'll just kind of step back. So, again, utopian, get behind every single iron shot. Nobody's actually going to do that. So that's actually bad advice. But doing that little move is a way that I personally have ingrained that initial weight shift to trigger my swing. Like if you asked me, if you said go up and do something totally different as a pre-shot routine, I wouldn't know how to start my swing. Like you said, I want you to sit over it for 20 seconds instead of 10. I just would be like, I don't know how to swing from here. That trigger, that initial weight shift is a vital part of your pre-shot routine.
Let's see. I think I got um, you talked real briefly about the combine test that Chris did. Um, how can a junior player improve by using the combines? What does it
Well, you're
tell?
just
What
gonna
does it tell them, first of all?
So there's different line tests, meaning with your irons, you're hitting either a wedge 9, 8, 7, or the long irons. Again, you're hitting these four different clubs. And what we're really doing is seeing can you get your golf ball started online? That's really it. And so you're hitting a shot this is an easier one to do with a friend helping you score. That was 5 yards right or left or whatever the number is. It's a lot easier to do, obviously, with a launch monitor where you're just hitting the shots and then just tallying. So there's three different line tests. There's ones that are called extreme, where you're really trying to hit it the same distance and direction. But what I'll say is like even just the TrackMan combine. Again, I understand not everybody has access to a TrackMan, but I asked Harrison Frazier, who some of y'all may not know, he's a guy that won on tour, played on tour for 20 years. He's a member at the same place where Scheffler practices, and I asked him one day, I'm like, what do you see Scotty doing out there practicing? He's like, that guy just sits down there and does TrackMan combines all day long. And so
Hmm.
we're trying to hit it directionally. But again, back to the idea of just hitting at the same target over and over and over again. You're not resetting up your TrackMan, so he is hitting it at the exact same target over and over and over again. And he's really working on that distance control. This is where it gets difficult, man. I hate saying this, but like I look back at when I was practicing my wedges, when you're just using a range ball, spin rates are completely different. I do think that having a shag bag of the ball you play with and going off onto whatever side of the range is safe. Like, so typically the left side, you're going to be in play of fewer shanks. So go all the way to the left side, go out and lay out towels at 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 yards and hit your golf ball at those towels and really work on the distance control of those things. That's the way to practice. And again, the line tests are going to be just analyzed. Zambri told me, he's like, if you gave me a kid's line test scores, I would recruit them as much or more than off their scores. Their scores, like I know I can clean up if they're doing dumb stuff on the course, but can you get your golf ball started online? Like that's step one to playing good golf. Can you get it started online?
Because that just feeds into what your targets and what you're going into a green with of if I predictably can tell you I'm going to go at this target with this shot pattern, it's much easier to pick where you're going to go on the green or on the or off the tee than it is if you go, you
I
know,
don't know where it's going.
I don't know
Yeah,
where it's
yeah. I
going.
mean, again, this is where it is a bit of a fake it before you make it thing. Like if you go out there and you're just like, I don't know where it's going, that's probably not a very helpful thought. You still need to pick a target. That's the one thing when people are, let's call it that 15 handicap range, they're like, I'm not good enough to need strategy. I'm like, well, if I caddied for you, would you be better? Yes. Well, then you can't say I don't need strategy. Ray Floyd's got a book called called The Art of Scoring. And in the jacket of it, it says, even if you and I had the identical skill set, so just give me your skill set, I'd still beat you 99 times out of 100. I fully subscribe to that theory. Like, even if, like, I took your skill set, so I'm just going to play you as a robot or you play yourself. I'll beat you 99 times out of 100. I mean, it just will. And again, I illustrated that with Zalatoris. That guy dropped like 2.5 strokes in his scoring average from his senior year of college, excuse me, of high school to his freshman year of college, which again, we started working together in that summer, like really working together in that summer. And the guy just, he didn't know how to play golf. I mean, again, that gets back to the idea, without getting too sciencey, the prefrontal cortex isn't finished developing yet. I I hate saying this to kids, but like you're not capable of making good decisions. I don't want that to sound mean or awful or whatever, but it's why you make a better soldier. There's a reason why soldiers are 18 and 19 years old because you do dumb stuff. If you asked you or me to go out there and run into a field with a gun where they might be shooting at you, you'd probably be like, I'm good. A 19-year-old, sing the Star Spangled Banner and get after it, man. Let's do this. Like, that's not a very good decision. Um, that's again what Decade is trying to accomplish is removing that decade or more of learning curve.
Well, and I think it's important too for the kids that because I know Chris came out here a couple of years ago and was working with Matthew on the combine tests um, and I think Rico Hoey was the best ever, and it
Hmm.
was some ridiculous number like
A ridiculous
29
number.
or 30 or something,
Yeah.
which is you're hitting 20 shots, you're counting 18, I think, and it's how
Yes.
many yards offline it was. So he was over 18 shots, he was a cumulative whatever 30 yards offline, which is
Well,
ridiculous.
just go watch DeChambeau right now when he's trying to hit this hole in one. I don't know if you
Yeah.
are on Instagram. He's trying to hit this hole in one over his house, and even I'm like, damn. This is
Yeah,
really impressive. Now, I'm guessing it's like an 80-yard shot just because of, how long the ball's in the air and what we're actually looking at here. I wish I knew exactly where his house was to measure it out,
yeah.
the length of the shot. I'm going to actually see if I can figure that out today. Uh, but
But his
so many
shot
of
pattern's
them.
pretty tight.
Yeah, it's really impressive. Now, it's been calm here in Dallas. He's hitting off of AstroTurf. There's a number of things that make this. He's hitting the exact same shot over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, it's like, man, this is really, really impressive how close he's hitting a lot of these shots. But also, he still hasn't made it.
Yeah.
Like, that's that's important.
Well, I think when Matthew did the first test, he had like it was like 110 or something like that, and he's like, "Oh my God, like I'm so far off of Rico." What kids need to understand is, the first time you take whatever that combine number is, that's your starting point, and
Exactly.
do it, however often you want. But the goal is just to improve that number, and the
Yeah.
better
And if
that
Rico
number
were a
gets,
junior golfer, it wouldn't have been the same. I mean, you're comparing yourself against one of the best ball strikers on the planet.
yeah.
Like, oh, really? You're worse than him? Like,
It
that's surprising.
would have been shocking if it turned out the other way. So
Yeah. But Rico's score is amazing. And then Justin Suh, I mean, again,
yeah,
Zambri's got Love Mark Suh. I mean, a lot of great players. Um, the putting scores that Justin Suh used to put up are also just really impressive.
yeah. Well, and I, for those, like you've said it a couple times here, if you have kind of a math mind, a lot of this makes sense. I was an accounting major, so all this math makes sense to me. Math is comforting to me, to pick something out and then feel comfortable hitting it, as opposed to those that I don't really understand this idea, but I'm a feel player, and I don't really understand that notion of, I don't really need the
It's a
number,
non
or I can,
sequitur. It doesn't mean anything.
yeah,
When someone says I'm a field player, to me, it's synonymous with I just don't want to do that work. I mean, I really do. Like, I'm a field player with my swing is one thing. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'm really going to feel a cutter. I'm really going to feel a draw. But when I ask someone, what's your target here? And their answer is, I'm just a field player. Like, oh, so you don't have one. I mean, even if you're a field player, swing wise, you still have to pick a small target. I
yeah,
mean, you're still feeling it to a spot. And if you're not, you're doing it wrong.
exactly. All right. Well, we're almost out of time. I appreciate all of your insight, Scott. For those that have not found you yet, I don't know why somebody hasn't found you yet, but you can go to decade.golf,
Yep.
sign up. You'll be astounded how much content there is. Um,
It's probably too much. It's a little overwhelming at this point. When I record these member webinars and everything, I wind up putting them in the app. It's a lot of information. So I also tell people, be patient with yourself. Like if you get out there on the course and you're feeling overwhelmed, take a few holes off, man. Just whistle and walk down the fairway, and then try to circle back into it. I do firmly believe that this is work that should be done away from the course. Again, this was accidental. I mean, I never would have thought to do an indoor seminar like the one you attended. The first one I gave was at SMU. And the
yeah,
only reason I did that was because the SMU coach at the time said, man, I've got this guy named Bryson DeChambeau that's a world beater, but I can't get him to stop aiming at flags. Like, can you teach this to him? And I'm like, sure. And he said, but then Jason Enlow, again, a guy I've known since college golf, he's like, but you've got to do it indoors. And I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? And he's like, I don't know, but that's the NCAA would consider you a third paid coach if we took him outside.
gotcha.
And so I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. And he does these indoor seminars, and I started thinking, like, you know what? I can just buy a drone and go fly it around a golf course, and then we'll just talk about it inside. And as I was doing it, I was like, this is the place to do this because it removes the emotion of hitting shots. I don't want you shanking a shot and getting embarrassed and then thinking, "Oh my God, Scott doesn't think I've got a good swing or can't play or I'm a fraud." I don't care. I'm here to teach you strategy. And so actually removing the emotional tie to outcome and each shot is really the best thing that we can do again in a playing lesson. That seems really strange for people to think, But indoor, so this is work that you should be doing at home, watching the content online and not and then trying to slowly apply it out there on the course. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to boil the ocean on day one. You don't have to do it all immediately. Take
Mm,
some time and bring it in slowly. And that's the reason foundations versus elite. I designed foundations for the less experienced junior golfer and or just player. Instead of getting all the information on day one, you get access to like an hour and a half that comes in it was supposed to be every month, but with the pandemic, I sped it up to every 2 weeks, settled on 3 weeks now that we're out of the pandemic. So an hour and a half of new content comes in every month to where every 3 weeks rather. So that way I want you to like, hey, here's the first session segment. Now take the next 3 weeks and think about this. And then we'll build on it next time to where you're still through all the content in 3 or 4 months. And that's again, I don't know when you'll release this, but we're doing a Black Friday sale right now that is a certain amount of dollars off. I think it's 30% off. But then we're going to start the second week of Christmas leading in, where you're going to get the first 3 months free. So you're going to get 9 months for the price of six. Because one of the biggest barriers to people buying is like, well, I'm not playing golf right now. I'm like, okay, I'll buy the winter for you because this is something you should be doing leading into the spring, not starting it in the spring.
right. That's excellent. Scott,
Perfect.
thank you very much.
Always, anytime you want to, buddy. That was fun.
All right.